They believed the front line was miles away. In the darkness of the Tunisian dawn, American units waited, unaware that they were already being observed. Radios crackled with incomplete orders. Maps no longer matched the terrain, and as the sound of engines echoed beyond the hills, a single truth began to assert itself. This battle would not unfold as they had imagined. At 4:50 a.m. on February 21st, 1943, Brigadier General Paul Robinet was in a shallow wadi, almost 30 kilometers east of Tubesa, Tunisia. The desert was still dark, the air cold, and the ground silent, except for the distant hum of engines that faintly echoed through the valley. From his position, Robinet observed the German armored formations gathering in the open terrain to the east. He knew what that meant. The attack was not a question of if, but rather when. Within hours, German tanks would be advancing toward him. These tanks belonged to Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commander of the Afrika Corps, a man already legendary in North Africa. For 2 years, Rommel had repelled British forces across deserts and coastal plains, winning battles thanks to speed, coordination, and relentless pressure. Just days before, he had decimated American units at the Kasserine Pass, clearing a path westward. Now, his attention was focused on Tubesa, the main Allied supply center in the region. If Rommel captured it, thousands of American soldiers would be isolated, and vast stockpiles of fuel, ammunition, and equipment would fall into German hands enough to sustain his army for months. Robinet commanded Combat Command B of the U.S. 1st Armored Division. His force was substantial on paper: 48 M4 Sherman tanks, 31 tank destroyers, 3 infantry battalions, and 11 artillery batteries. But on the other side of the valley, Rommel was assembling elements of the 10th Panzer Division, parts of the 21st Panzer Division, and the Italian Centauro Armored Division, possibly 120 tanks supported by mechanized infantry and artillery. The numbers were roughly comparable. The experience, not so much. Rommel's troops had been fighting continuously since the beginning of 1941. They had won decisive engagements at Tobruk and dozens of smaller battles. They understood desert warfare. They understood mobility. Most importantly, they understood how to integrate tanks, infantry, and artillery into a single coordinated force. The American troops did not. The U.S. Army had been in combat for 9 days. Most of the soldiers had never seen a German before February 14th. Many had never been under artillery fire. Few had seen men die beside them. Rommel clearly understood this imbalance. Even before the fighting began, Rommel wrote in his diary that the American units were inexperienced, poorly led, and prone to collapse under pressure. German intelligence corroborated this view. Reports described the American formations as disorganized, with a confused command structure and inadequate but poorly utilized equipment. The Germans expected a quick victory. For the first 72 hours, this expectation seemed entirely justified. The first blow occurred on February 14, 1943, at Sidi Bouzid. U.S. Combat Command A of the 1st Armored Division occupied positions near 3 isolated hills, with infantry scattered across the high ground and tanks concentrated in the valley below. At dawn, German armor attacked from 2 directions. They completely bypassed the infantry positions, isolating them on the hills, and then advanced directly towards the American tanks. American doctrine at the time was fundamentally flawed. U.S. tank units were trained to locate and destroy enemy armor in direct tank-to-tank combat. Infantry was expected to handle enemy infantry. Artillery would suppress guns. Tank destroyers would neutralize advances. These elements operated separately. German doctrine was the opposite. Tanks, infantry, and artillery advanced together, continuously supporting each other. At Sidi Bouzid, American forces fought alone. The German 21st Panzer Division attacked from the north, while the Italian Centaur Division advanced from the south. Their movements were synchronized. American tanks were caught in the converging fire for 4 hours. Combat Command fought bravely. They destroyed perhaps a dozen German tanks. They lost 57 Shermans. At noon, the commanders ordered a retreat. By early afternoon, the unit had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. The following day, February 15th, American forces attempted a Rommel did not blindly advance toward Tebessa. He paused, studying the situation with the caution of a commander who understood both the opportunities and the risks. His forces were scattered, fuel was scarce, and Allied air power was increasing by the hour. British units were pressing from the east. American resistance, though disorganized, was intensifying. The momentum that had driven the Afrika Korps to Kasserine could not be sustained indefinitely. German intelligence now reported heavy Allied concentrations near Thala, northwest of Kasserine. British artillery units had positioned themselves. American reinforcements were arriving from the west. Rommel knew that if he advanced too far and became bogged down, his army could be surrounded and destroyed. Tebessa was tempting, but it was no longer defenseless. On February 21st, Rommel issued new orders. Instead of a direct advance toward Tebessa, German forces were to move north, attempting to secure the mountain passages around Thala and neutralize Allied artillery. This shift reflected Rommel's instinct for maneuver rather than brute force. However, it also signaled a transition. The rapid exploitation phase of the offensive was drawn to a close. At Thala, the Allied defenses were unlike anything the Americans had deployed days before. British artillery units, veterans of years of desert warfare, had established overlapping firing zones. Their guns were entrenched, camouflaged, and carefully positioned. Forward observers maintained constant contact. When German armor approached, it was met not by scattered fire, but by continuous and coordinated barrages. The German advance slowed dramatically. Tanks maneuvered cautiously. Infantry advanced close to the ground. The rhythm that had defined Rommel's previous victories had vanished. Air attacks increased. Allied fighter bombers attacked German columns on exposed roads, forcing them to disperse and delaying resistance. Meanwhile, further south, Brigadier General Paul Robinet was preparing his defense east of Tebessa. Unlike previous American commanders, Robinet concentrated his forces. He positioned his tanks in low-profile positions, hidden behind undulations in the terrain. Artillery was positioned for mutual support, rather than isolated firing points. Infantry units were positioned to protect the armor, not to operate separately from them. Robinet understood that this was not a place for counterattacks or movement. It was a place to resist. On the morning of February 21st, German armored reconnaissance vehicles probed Robinet's line. The artillery responded immediately. The projectiles hit their targets accurately, forcing the German vehicles to retreat. The expected mass attack did not occur. Rommel had seen enough. Tebessa would not fall. The risk outweighed the reward. That afternoon, Rommel ordered the troops to withdraw. German units began retreating through the Kasserine Pass, abandoning the initiative they had gained days before. The retreat was disciplined, protected by rearguard actions and artillery fire. Despite Allied air attacks, most German forces escaped unscathed. The opportunity to destroy Rommel's army had vanished, But the immediate danger had passed. For the Americans, the battle was over. The cost was exorbitant. More than 6,500 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. Hundreds of tanks, vehicles, and artillery pieces lay abandoned or destroyed throughout central Tunisia. Entire units ceased to function. Command failures were impossible to ignore. Tactical doctrine had collapsed under the current conditions of combat. However, the defeat brought a lesson that would reshape the U.S. Army. Reports from the battlefield spread rapidly through the chain of command. General Dwight D. Eisenhower demanded accountability. Major General Lloyd Fredendell, commander of the Second Corps, was relieved of his post. His replacement arrived days later, Lieutenant General George S. Patton. Patton was wasted on the team. He imposed discipline immediately. Helmets were worn at all times. Units were reorganized. Commanders were ordered to lead from the front lines. Artillery coordination became mandatory. Tanks, infantry, and guns would fight together or not HEO. The Americans had been defeated but not annihilated. The lessons of Casarini were paid for in blood but were learned quickly. Within weeks, American forces would return to combat not as isolated formations, but as a coordinated army capable of adapting under fire. For Rommel, Casarini represented, in the days following the German retreat, the battlefield around Casarini was plunged into an unsettling silence. Burned vehicles dotted the valleys. Abandoned equipment lay scattered along the retreat routes. The terrain itself bore the marks of the fight-time potholed roads, shattered stone walls, and shallow graves hastily dug by survivors. For the American soldiers cautiously returning through the pass, the magnitude of the defeat was impossible to ignore. Units that had entered Tunisia confident and inexperienced now carried the weight of experience. Men who had fled under artillery fire days before silently returned to their positions, no longer expecting the war to resemble drills or training manuals. They had seen what German combined arms were capable of. They had learned painfully that courage without coordination was not enough. General George S. Patton arrived at the Second Corps headquarters on March 6, 1943. His presence was immediate and unmistakable. He personally toured the positions, inspecting uniforms, equipment, and defensive dispositions. Officers who showed hesitation were replaced. Orders were brief, direct, and followed without exception. The American army in Tunisia was changing, not gradually, but out of necessity. In practice, artillery doctrine was rewritten. Guns were no longer scattered and left unsupported. Fire plans were now coordinated in advance. Observers were trained to respond instantly. Communications were simplified. When enemy units appeared, the response was no longer confusion, but concentrated fire. Tank units underwent similar changes. Sherman ceased to advance alone in open terrain. Infantry moved alongside armored vehicles, protecting flanks and clearing positions inaccessible to tanks. Tank destroyers were repositioned as mobile ambush weapons instead of static defenses. Lessons learned by the Germans on the battlefield were being absorbed, adapted, and applied. However, Rommel's situation deteriorated rapidly. His forces retreated eastward toward the Marat line, an old French defensive system built to deter an Italian invasion decades earlier. It had now become the last major defensive barrier between the Axis forces and total defeat in North Africa. Rommel knew the line was strong on paper, but vulnerable to maneuver and overwhelming firepower. Supplies were critically low. Fuel shortages, limited movement, ammunition needed to be rationed. Allied air superiority intensified daily, striking ports, roads, and columns. Every German movement risked being detected from the skies. The freedom of maneuver that had defined Rommel's previous campaigns had vanished. On March 16th, Allied forces launched their attack on the Marit Line. British units attacked head-on, while American forces, now reorganized and reinforced, advanced across the desert to the south in a wide flanking maneuver. This time, the coordination worked. Artillery supported the advance. Air power disrupted German counterattack. Infantry, armor, and engineers advanced as a single system. German resistance was fierce, but increasingly limited. Rommel counterattacked whenever possible, but his forces lacked sufficient power to capitalize on success. Each engagement consumed resources he could not replenish. By the end of March, Axis forces were retreating again, this time toward the coast. For the American units, the contrast with Casarini was stark. Movements were deliberate. Commanders communicated clearly. When German tanks appeared, American artillery responded immediately. When infantry encountered resistance, armor and air support followed. The chaos of February was giving way to control. In April, Axis forces were trapped in an ever-shrinking area in northeastern Tunisia. Ports were destroyed. Supply routes collapsed. Allied pressure was coming from all directions. Rommel, exhausted and ill, was recalled to Germany. Command passed to General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim. The end was approaching. On May 13, 1943, more than 250,000 Axis soldiers surrendered in Tunisia. It was one of the largest capitulations of the war. North Africa was secure. The Mediterranean was open. The road to Sicily and continental Europe was clear. However, Casarini's importance did not diminish with the victory. For the United States Army, that moment remained decisive, a brutal introduction to modern mechanized warfare. The defeat exposed weaknesses that could no longer be as Allied forces advanced through Tunisia in the spring of 1943. The transformation of the American army became increasingly visible on the battlefield. Units that had previously advanced hesitantly now moved with purpose. Commanders coordinated movements across broad fronts. Artillery fire was no longer reactive, but planned, shaping the combat even before contact was made. The American soldiers who survived Casarini no longer considered German armor invincible. They understood its strengths and its limitations. They had learned that speed could be countered by preparation, that uncoordinated aggression led to destruction, and that discipline under fire could decide battles before the first shot was fired. Training continued even during the course of combat operations. Post-action reports were analyzed in detail. Failures were openly dissected. Tactical manuals were revised in practice, not just on paper. Combined arms warfare ceased to be an abstract concept and became a requirement imposed at all levels of command. The psychological impact of Casarini remained strong. Many soldiers carried with them the memories of sudden bombardments, crumbling defensive lines, and desperate retreats through narrow passages. These memories did not weaken them. On the contrary, they sharpened their perception. Defensive positions began to be chosen carefully. Retreat routes were planned. Fields of fire were measured, not just estimated. For the German forces, the situation progressively worsened. Allied numerical superiority became overwhelming. The once fluid desert warfare transformed into a grueling battle of attrition. German units fought skillfully, but each loss was irreparable. Fuel shortages forced tanks to remain idle. Artillery ammunition dwindled. Air raids disrupted even routine movements. The Marit Line, once conceived as a decisive barrier, became merely another holding position. Allied forces broke through it through maneuvers and sustained firepower. Axis troops retreated again, this time towards the Infidave line and the coastal plains beyond it. Each retreat reduced defensive depth and restricted options. Throughout these operations, American artillery proved decisive. Concentrated fire annihilated German counterattacks before they could fully develop. Forward observers, now experienced and confident, coordinated attacks with precision. Infantry advanced behind continuous barrages. Armor exploited gaps instead of blindly charging against resistance. Changes in leadership continued to shape the outcome. Officers who adapted remained in command. Those who did not learn were replaced. The army that emerged from Tunisia bore little resemblance to the force that had entered North Africa months earlier. The cost of this transformation was high. Casualties steadily increased throughout April and early May. Men fell not only in attacks but also in containment actions, patrols, and night fighting. The war continued relentlessly. Even so, morale remained high. The soldiers understood the purpose of their actions. They trusted their commanders. They trusted each other. With the collapse of Axis defenses, Allied pressure intensified. German and Italian units were trapped in areas near the coast. Ports were neutralized. Escape by sea became impossible. The end, once distant, was now inevitable. On May 13, 1943, the North African campaign officially ended. Axis forces laid down their arms in numbers that surprised even Allied commanders. Entire divisions surrendered. Equipment was abandoned. Prisoners were taken into captivity under the watch of soldiers who, months before, had fought to resist. The victory in Tunisia represented the first complete defeat of German ground forces by the Western Allies. It provided momentum, confidence, and served as a testing ground for future operations. The lessons learned there would be applied in Sicily, Italy, and Normandy. However, no victory erased the memory of Casarini. For those who fought there, the battle remained a reminder of how quickly modern warfare punishes and how decisively adaptation can change the outcome. The battle was marked not by triumph, but by transformation. Long after the cannons fell silent in Tunisia, the name Casarini continued to resonate in American military doctrine. It became more than just a place on the map. It became a warning, studied and remembered by commanders who understood how close disaster had been averted. The battle exposed weaknesses that could no longer be explained solely by inexperience. The initial setbacks were a direct result of divided command, poor intelligence, and flawed assumptions about the enemy's capabilities and intentions. It forced a painful but necessary re-evaluation of how the U.S. Army would fight. The lessons were harsh but clear. A unified command structure was essential. General Eisenhower, who had allowed the command in Tunisia to be split between American, British, and French forces, took this lesson to heart. He consolidated authority, creating a more streamlined and effective chain of command. This principle would guide his leadership for the remainder of the war, most notably during the Normandy invasion. Intelligence gathering and dissemination were overhauled. The failure to anticipate Rommel's thrust through the pass was a glaring intelligence breakdown. The army learned it needed better reconnaissance, better analysis, and faster communication to turn raw data into actionable intelligence. This led to significant investment in signals intelligence and aerial reconnaissance, tools that would become indispensable in later campaigns. The battle also brutally demonstrated the superiority of German armor and anti-tank tactics at that stage of the war. American M3 Grant and Stuart tanks were no match for the German Panzer IVs and the feared 88mm guns. This technological gap spurred a rapid acceleration in American tank design and production. The M4 Sherman while still having its own flaws, was a direct response to the shock of Casarini, offering a more capable platform that could be produced in vast numbers. Tactical doctrine was also the piecemeal commitment of forces and the poor coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery had proven disastrous. Casarini taught American commanders the necessity of combined arms warfare, the idea that different military branches must work in close cooperation. Training exercises were redesigned to simulate the harsh realities of the modern battlefield, forcing units to coordinate their actions under pressure. This shift from theoretical doctrine to practical application was perhaps the most enduring legacy of the battle. Beyond the technical and tactical adjustments, Casarini forged a new generation of American combat leaders. Generals like Omar Bradley and George S. Patton, who were instrumental in the recovery and subsequent victory in Tunisia, carried the lessons of Casarini with them. Patton, in particular, instilled a new level of discipline and aggression in the demoralized Second Corps. His leadership demonstrated that morale and fighting spirit were just as important as tanks and guns. The memory of the defeat served as a constant motivator, a reminder of the price of unpreparedness. It bred a culture of adaptability and a relentless drive for improvement within the U.S. Army. Commanders who failed to learn and adapt were quickly replaced. The experience in the dusty hills of Tunisia transformed a green, untested army into a hardened, professional fighting force. The road from Casarini to the beaches of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes was paved with the hard-won lessons from that initial, bloody encounter. It was a baptism by fire that, while costly, ultimately tempered the steel of the American military machine. It ensured that when the U.S. Army next faced the Wehrmacht in a major engagement, it would be a far more formidable and lethal opponent. The ghosts of Casarini Pass served as a silent but powerful teacher, shaping the strategy and leadership that would eventually lead to victory in Europe. Thank you for watching, and if you found this documentary insightful, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into pivotal moments in history.